Hi. Okay. So, welcome to the last reading. The last no preparation, just opening the book and reading and yeah. Yeah, and these have been taking a bit longer to do or to even just like sit down in front of because I have loved doing this so much. And reading the book cover to cover, the original intent was that it would provide a companion for anybody reading the book because as you can see, it is textbook energy and supporting it with like kind of a side like a director's cut kind of side by side thing. Also, some of the intention had been when it started over a year ago with reading these, some of the intention had started out with when people started reading the book, I'd been I didn't really know what to prepare for. I mean, some of I guess probably the most popular responses in, are about, like, how intense it is. I'd say the 2 top are how intense it is, and so one is how intense it is, and the second is, "How did you do this?" And that was actually some of the first where it just kind of knocked people on their ass as far as being like, "How did you do this?" Still comes up a lot. And so this was kind of intended these readings were kind of intended to, like, talk a little bit about that, and they wound up not talking about it as much as I thought as the process went on. So, just to kind of give an overview here for what I'm gonna be talking about and reading on today as the last reading, is I'm gonna talk a bit about the final days of writing the book. And so this is gonna be probably a lot more about production. I'm gonna talk about the bibliography and the acknowledgements, the author bio, and I would be remiss not to point back to the foreword because these were all the parts of the book that were like the last pieces. And there was another thing, the emotion wheel in chapter 6 was one of the last things to be created as well, which is really like there was just kind of like the last stand of like things to create. And so I guess before I talk more about this, I'm going to talk a little bit about what comes next. So after I wrap this up, I'm actually going to start doing a scheduled, and I'm still landing on the exact days. I'm thinking Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, or maybe Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday for a half hour timed, planned session that has to do with practicing parinama, which is talking about a taking on a specific topic, reading a little bit about it. And this is ultimately designed to support people who are in the process of reading the book. And also, full disclosure, I really love being in it. So I love being inside the reading of this book and the contemplation of it and just the process of it. I'm missing it right now. And so I'm really looking forward to doing this. But I'm going to move it over to being a lot more practical because this like past year's read through has just been very off the cuff, like opening it up and kind of reading it and being kind of like, whoa, and having my own experience with it. And so what I'm going to be doing in this next run is facilitating and supporting other people in theirs, as likely I'm impacted as well. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be doing it. So for this this farewell to this era, I'm going to talk about the final days and talk more about the production of the book and some of the things related to that. And the final days, the bibliography, acknowledgements, author bio, and a little bit about the forward. And once again, these are the final things that were created. And there was a deadline to get the manuscript over to design because everybody's on a schedule. So it's like it's like you get this period of time and there's somebody that's expecting to get the work started. And so so me and Allison, the editor of Parinama, were working furiously for a year plus, but ultimately yeah, like a year and a half, like full on, to get the manuscript put together. And just kind of a funny thing that I think about was that, like, I'd been nervous. So the book manuscript had been in 2 parts because Allison and I would flip them back and forth. So she'd be editing, like, up through essentially chapter 7, and then the second half is the back end of the book, chapter 7 through 13 and beyond. And so we'd flip them back and forth. So she'd be editing one while I'd be, like, working on her notes and doing the work that she had directed me to do. So, and also one of the things about a file, like, I didn't know how big a book is supposed to be. This is actually, this is not unrelated. So I didn't really, like, I had kind of a notion of, like, this was gonna be a big book. Like, I kind of already knew what it was gonna feel like when I just started doing it. I knew it was gonna feel like a cookbook. That was part of my thing, even in terms of the dimensions, because everything about the look and the feel of the book is a decision that's made. And, so so I didn't know how big it was gonna be, and I was starting to get scared because I would, like, and I probably should still be a little scared because it's massive. It's really massive. But I was kind of I was like, "Oh, shoot, is this gonna be just, like, how massive? To what extent of massive?" And when Allison, put together the 2 files, she accidentally put the second section in twice, and this is when we were figuring out how many pages the book was gonna be, and she sent it over to me when I was about to pass it back. Oh, because it was, like, putting them, yeah, to Sheila, the designer and illustrator, and it was 666 full pages, and I remember my heart just sank because there was also stuff about producing it and how expensive it is to produce this book. I mean, it's a $50 book, and I know that, there was a lot of advising that I initially got to charge a lot more for this book and gate it in a very different way. So not to produce it as a book, but to kind of produce it as more along the lines of what it is, which is a textbook and a guide that is, like, so deeply comprehensive and so, like, profound and potent that it would be something that, is like, orders of magnitude more expensive, significant more barrier of entry to gain it. And I'd made the decision that I didn't want to do that, which who knows whether that was the right thing or not, but it's what happened. But there's also the matter of producing the book, because I was very clear about the way that I want the look and the feel, and that I wanted it to look inviting so that it be color, uh, is not like a decision for a book this size to make it full color. It's full color. Um, like, it's not a minor decision. In fact, in terms of the profitability of the book, if I were to have made it black and white on the inside, like, I could actually, there's a version of events where I actually make money on it. There's this version is, like, completely like an offering at the foot of the gods, so to speak, because I make no money on it and I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to produce it. So this is, really, like, it lives outside of consumerism in that very sense, like, in outside of kind of traditional capitalism, because it made no sense even when I was doing it. I knew, I was like, I don't have an end result. And as somebody who'd been, I guess, had a successful track record as it relates to capitalism, I knew that I was like, the way I was making the decisions. So there was so much anxiety. I was so nervous because I thought, God, there is, like, the cost of the book, because the size of it was related to being like, "Oh my God," because I'd been talking with publishers, I've been talking with printers, and a 666-page book, I was like, it's, like, going to be, I mean, it's like $100 book. It's like, and I was like, "All right, that's, like, not even, like, splitting the difference. That's just basically, it's like, okay, um, yeah, just to produce it." I'm not even talking about margins in terms of, like, anything I recognize off of it, which is already really it's already quite small, um, relative to what I imagine people think it is. You know, I think one person had kind of criticized and said, "This is a cash grab," and I was like, "For everyone else, it's a cash grab. For me, it's a cash offering." Um, and also, I feel really strongly when people are called to this book and it's on any level, like, where people have communicated with me about being called to it, that I give it to them. It's another thing, to the point of cash grab. It's such a projection. Anybody who's like, "This is a cash grab," it's such a projection. Don't even it doesn't really reach me because 'cause I'm like, "Yeah, I wish it'd be great." Like, what? Or I don't know. It's, like, definitely not a cash grab. I wouldn't say it'd be great if it is. But anyway, so, yeah, and then we figured it out, and then we're like, "Oh, it's only 336 pages," or whatever. There's all these things that have to do with, like, industry specs, and one of them was that the book should be 300 and I think it was 336 pages is, like, this magical number of pages that has to do with printing. All these things. All these things, like, even as a throwback to chapter 12 about building and creating, it's like you just learn a lot. You learn a lot about, like, how to do something and what it takes and, blah, 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 just by doing it, and for anybody that's worried about not knowing how to do something as a reason not to do it, it's like you learn by doing it. I mean, I didn't know how to write a book. There's so many things. Actually, one of the other things I'll mention in terms of, like, this being sort of like a production breakdown is that I didn't know about proofreading. I didn't know there's, like, actual gates, and I don't know why this was, like, not made clear to me. There's gates for, like, that a manuscript passes through. And it wound up working out for me, but the scrutiny that I put the manuscript through before sending it over to design was excruciating. Like, I read it out loud, the entire book, and that way you catch a lot of stuff that, like, has, like, syntax issues, or it just catches stuff that when you're reading it in your head, just you can kind of, like, breeze over. So, I was really looking at every pass-through as being like, "This is going to be the offering that readers receive," and taking that really seriously. This is as being an offering for readers, and taking it really seriously to respect that a reader wouldn't have to be slogging through syntactical issues or finding it, because I already knew it was like dense. I already knew it was intense. I already knew that, like, what we're undertaking in the book is like such a, like, significant it's just a significant undertaking, and so it just like, every kind of aspect of unnecessary resistance I was taking really seriously. I was reducing, trying to get, like, the beauty of it. So it's really like when people react to it, I just had somebody react and be like, "Oh, it's beautiful," and, like, I love that. That's really wonderful. 'Cause it really matches with the intent. But with the scrutiny around the editing and making sure that it was, like, very readable, it's a really well-written book, and this is something where I'm gonna say that, um, that it's really a tribute to fantastic guidance, because my editor, Allison Lowender, was taught me how to write. I mean, if I were to produce the early versions of this, they'd be unrecognizable. And it's what an extraordinary gift to have Allison guide me through the process and show me how to write the book, how to find a voice, how to edit, what to take out, how to understand clarity, how to understand punctuation. Like, it just was a masterclass. I have a, like, PhD in, an undocumented PhD in writing because of what she taught me. And it was, yeah, I mean, and that was, like, easily my favorite thing that I've ever done in my life is writing this book, and very specifically, the process of it, of having it come through me and being able to, like, be in this terrifying space that was also, like, incredibly clear. So it was, like, in this, like, very risky, scary, kind of expansive place, but also with a complete sense of clarity that this is what I was supposed to be doing. I still have not like, fully like, I don't haven't I actually kind of have some of it, but it's a different form. Now it's not about anything I'm doing, it's just about my life. But it is like that this sense that this was this thing that just absolutely needed to be completed and created. And having Allison by my side as like as a, guardian angel, coach, Sherpa, this is kind of the thing, I guess is like I'm gonna kind of as like sort of a side note on this is that when we're stuck and feeling really uninspired by the work we're doing or the situation we're in, it's really hard to imagine that there's this version of living where ease flows, like where the right people come into our lives, where we get supported in this way because the magnetism of like what we're working on is being directly in our integrity is like creates something. It creates this kind of thing, creates a thing, creates a thing. I don't know what it is. It creates a thing. But so that and so I'd be also be remiss to say that not only was it Allison who edited the book and made it what it is. And Allison worked as an editor for Condé Nast, which is like Vogue and all the major magazines. So she knows how, and she'd worked on the Village Voice. So I mean, she's just such a like epic baddie. The so she knew how to write things. She knew how to edit for readability and like to be able to be like more palatable and consumable, like just so professional level. I mean, if you read the book, um and the other thing is she edits for international relations articles for Princeton, which are these like massive tomes of like academic, like very complex academic, like conceptual stuff, and that she can handle that. So it's like this real miracle of having somebody come in that could take really complicated things and understand how to make it really like significantly more accessible. I don't know if I can call part of this book accessible, but that's a whole other topic. That's not for like doesn't really match the kind of vibe of what I'm talking about today. But I will say that in those last days of finalizing the manuscript to go over to Sheila Parr, who is the designer, layout, illustration, it was like a scramble. And all of these components, getting the bibliography right, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that just from a production standpoint, writing the acknowledgements, the author bio, the back of the book came later actually. So all the stuff that's on the cover is not, you don't like the interior of the book is the part that is like you moving the manuscript over, it gets worked on, and then the cover stuff was like due at later dates. So that's kind of another story, and I don't know it's that interesting, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. I read it in the last reading, but in those last few days, Allison and I were just working so hard together, and I remember I have this memory of it was a Sunday night because we were sending the manuscript over to Sheila, so she had it in the morning on Monday. That was been the due date for it, is that she'd have it starting to begin work on that Monday morning. And I remember I'd like gone out to get a Chipotle salad bowl, and I remember just walking back home with it, knowing that it was like the end of this experience with Allison. That, like, we would still and we still are. I mean, we're talking about this is now almost 2 years later, like, we still talk. A couple of weeks ago, we had this or no, last week or the week before maybe. We still talk. We love each other. But it's like it's a bond. Like, we spent so much time going deep into this really kind of wild place. But it was this thing of, like, knowing this adventure we were having was over, and it's just like and loving it. Like, and having like and feeling like this is my favorite place I've ever been to, the favorite place I've ever traveled to. like the best travel companion, guide, teacher, like just yeah, I'd never had a mentor who had affected me to the extent Allison had. I mean, I've had a lot of mentors. I've been very lucky, but it was just this feeling, and I remember walking back, and it was like heartbreak. It was grieving. I was grieving the end of this, and I remember it was just like there were so many complicated emotions at the end of the project. There were so many complicated emotions because also the book was leaving us, and it was going into this whole deeper stage of being for other people and not being for to serve my interests or, whatever. Like, it was literally about, like, how do we make this better for you, the reader? How do we make this experience right? And yeah, and there were so many complicated emotions. I think one of the things somebody asked me today, they said, "What's it like to hold a book in your hands that you've written?" And I was like, "Yeah, it like," and I thought about it, and I was like, "It's great." But the holding the book in my hands, like, when it first came, the first proof, because they send a proof, so you look at it and you go, "Okay, yeah," or make any notes in terms of the production, the quality, the coloration, I'd wanted it to be not hardcover because I want it to be, like, sort of easier to read, like a cookbook kind of vibe, like some of the cookbooks I like. And so I had a lot of specs on, like, how I want it to look and feel, and it totally landed. Like, it was like I opened it and I was like, "Oh my god." And it calmed me down. As soon as I held it in my hands, it calmed me down because there's all this time where it's like it's coming into, and this is, like, very, like, in this sort of, like, first hub thing where all of the options are getting, like culled or whatever. They're just shedding, and you're getting, like, very focused on one outcome, and it's nervy. And I remember when I submitted the whole file with, like, the edited, proofread. I haven't talked about proofreading. I don't know how interesting it'll be to people because that's a whole process too. And, like, the whole file to the printer, and I remember it was, like, one of the most complicated emotions I've ever had, which is really odd to say, but it was like buzzy. It was, like, very, like, unsettled, excited, happy, sad. It was like experiencing a suite of emotions all simultaneously, and it was really disappointing. I remember being like, "This is a bummer because 'cause isn't this supposed to be something that's happy?" There were a lot of times in this process where I thought, "Isn't this something I'm supposed to be really happy about?" And then there'd be times where I was, like, super happy. I remember this one time, I think it was, like, right after I'd held the book in my hands, it was like, "Okay, okay, everything's gonna be okay." Like, it exists now, so I can kind of rest. It was, like, the first time I'd been like, "Okay, I can rest," and I needed a lot more rest than I realized because it's like, and I don't know why that wasn't abundantly clear to me. It's abundantly clear to anyone who sees the scope of the book. But I remember, like, going down for a walk and listening to a song and just feeling like, "Whew, like, we did it, we did it, we did it, we did it." But anyway, so a lot of emotions in it. And one of the things that I forget about was, something, and this is something that refined over this last year of doing the practice as it relates to going, like, chronologically cover to cover and reading it in these sections, is the continued revealing of being authentically myself and communicating in a way where I'm, like, not hedging to be pleasing to people that I, like, might need to be pleasing to, like, not having as much of the, like, and I'd done a lot of that, like, as a professional. So this book was like, "Okay, well, there's no hiding anymore because there's literally a record a record that really is, like, very clearly documents, like, my position on things." It's like, so if yeah, so that was something, and that's something, I forget, like, that I forget what that means, as far as, like, the earliest stages and then the ongoing aspect of it. Because I don't think there's a thing where it's like, I'm fully authentic. It's like, because the thing about being authentic, it's also, like, discovering, like, what's there, what remains after it's, like, burning off the edifices. Because sometimes it's like with the edifice, it's like, yeah, it's hard to know what will remain after, you've been put into the crucible, and, like, with sort of what comes out. So that's been an ongoing, like, revelation that's been, like, exactly like being in a crucible, which is like, it's like liberating, but also, like being set on fire. Sorry, it's like so yeah, so that was one of the things about the end of this. So as far as, like, one of the things that's funny is the bibliography was, so when you read, I read, like, over 300 books, piles of journal articles, listened to tons of, like, recordings, scientific articles, interviews. The amount of research that went into this book is shocking, because, and I mean shocking, because in the last year, I don't know that I've read probably, like, less than 5 books. So, I think that people think because I'm, like, smart, that it means that I'm, like, kind of a classic smart person, in the sense of just being like, I read all the time, and like, I do so much dummy stuff, like, I'm, like, big into dummy stuff, and so it's like, so the fact that I guess it, like, people are sort of impressed, but they're like, "Oh, like, well, seems like something you do," and it's like, it's absolutely not something I do. I read so much. I was at the Boston Public Library pulling out stacks, like, because I'd go online and I'd order the books, and I'd come and I'd take my big stack with me, and I'd, like, work through them, and then I'd, like, go for more, and this is very much, I think, probably, like, I think something that's useful to talk about for this process is, as it relates to, like, anyone's creative process, is that the books that I was taking out were things where I was super receptive. When we talk about creating and building, I was super receptive, that when I was thinking about something, or when I was focused on a particular topic, that I would, like, follow my nose on it. And then, like, things, I'd have conversations with people, they'd recommend books, I'd listen to a podcast, they'd talk about this or that, and I'd, like, Google it, and then there'd be, like, an article, and then the author that was referenced in the, or interviewed in the article, I'd, like, I'd get their book. Audiobooks. I li I used to, one of the things, and, like, just as a side note, is some of the books I read were really dense, and, like, ironically, I wrote a dense book, but I were kind of impassable for me, so what I would do is I'd actually read them while I listened to the audiobook. It, like, worked. It, like, kind of, I think it's, like, 2 different types of reception. It's like ears and eyes. So it would actually help me, like, pull it in and retain the information. But as I wrote the book and as I was reading books, I would I had this file. It was just a Google Doc, like a Word doc, and I just write the name of the book and the author. I didn't write it as a ABA, like, whatever citation. I literally just was like, I need to remember all these books. And so one of the things is I hired somebody, or I gave them that list, and I said, "Can you just, like, create a bibliography out of this?" I think it was out of, like, one of those, like, a contract on demand, where I hired, like, a grad student to do it. And then that wasn't, like, it didn't meet the specs for, like, my editor. Like, Allison was like, "This is a hot mess." And also, one of the things I learned is that and this was something I still feel kinda like, "Huh," about, is that there are books that I read that really influenced my thinking, but are not directly cited. So they really shaped the take I started to have on things, or, you know, so But I wouldn't directly cite them, and so Allison made it really clear that for the bibliography, it needed to be directly cited in order for it to be included, which I was originally kinda like, "Huh." On one hand, I was like, "Huh, it feels sort of unfair because there's just work that I don't know, as much as it's not it, really is in it there for me." Like, I'll be reading it, and I'll, like, really be able to feel the influence of another book or, like, another, like, academic or whatever. I can feel, like, how they impacted my thinking on something and remember that. But I guess them's the rules. And also there was, like, kind of a sense of relief because the bibliography is so massive. I mean, right now, even it's still pretty big. It's on page 3 something or other, and, I mean, it's like let's do it. So you've got, like, 1 there's yeah, there's some books that were referenced. Yeah, and that's, like, the cut down version. I think we cut it almost in half from what I'd originally wanted, but also it was, like, a work thing. Like, I'm talking about the last days of writing this, and correcting the bibliography was, like, for Allison to edit it, it was, like, really painful because it was just, like, it's such detail-y work, and you need to, like, be doing referencing and checking and blah, bitty, blah, bitty, blah. And then also my proofreader wound up, like, taking another slice at it to make it actually, like, correct. So a lot of labor went into getting that, like, concise and then correctly written. And I guess one of the things is, like, when I wrote term papers in high school and maybe even in college, they were just like the hot mess express of just, like, piles of yeah, they just, like, yeah, I won't I won't. Yeah, no need to talk about that, but I mean, it just is further evidence of the fact that it's like I never wrote anything substantive. Like, I think I wrote a term paper in high school on, like, Theodore Geisel, like, Dr. Seuss, and then I wrote one on, like, Anne Sexton and, Sylvia Plath because my English teacher kind of fancied me as sort of a, kinda something or other, and was like, "These are your people." And yeah, aren't we all, like, so project-onable? Doesn't sound great. But anyway, so the bibliography was a lot of work from people other than myself, and my process of doing it. I mean, because one of the things too is if you're writing a book and there's a lot of options in terms of how to do citations, like as footnotes, and also I don't have an index in the book. It just was it would work really well. This book would work really well with indexing, but it just was a matter of, like, at the end of this process, it was like, I don't have it in me. I had people offer too. I had people say like, "Hey, I could," and I was like, I mean, now with AI, you could probably get it done. Like, but and I guess maybe in some future state, this gets indexed so people can reference it more easily based on subject matter. But I just didn't I mean, at the end of this, I was not and, like, looking back, I mean, I knew it but it was like it was really the last haul was, like, a lot. It was a lot because I was also working in a company, so that was, like it seemed like it was gonna be a good idea, and it kind of was, and it kind of wasn't. So, I don't have regrets about it. It's just yeah, no regrets on it, but it just made things harder and easier in some ways. But anyway, so I'm gonna speak to the acknowledgements here, and the acknowledgements at the end of the book, they're kind of like it's funny because they're just, like it was, like, 11th hour. And it's kind of like, look, you've got this they're long, it's 11th hour shit, and if I'm being honest, it was like it's kind of like this moment where, theoretically, I'm supposed to be writing this like, this kinda, like, final word of gratitude, but I was just so tired, and I kinda couldn't remember people, and it was, like, hackneyed, and there's people in here that just got a lot of space that it's kinda like, "Alright, whatever." I mean, I'm still grateful. There's nobody that I'm like, I want anything to be taken out of. There's some people that are in twice. Yeah. And then I did do some oh my gosh, some of these people, I'm like, "That's really wild." Yeah, it's kind of oh my god, yeah, I tried to do, like, a retrospective and think about all the people that have impacted my journey, and it kind of was just, like honestly, it's kind of just a like, it's fine, but I don't feel like it's sort of, it really serves the ultimate purpose of it. It's nice because there's a lot of people that are in there that I think are surprised by it. Because some of the thing about it was that there were people that impacted me without realizing it, and that was actually one of the nice things to put in there is to surprise people with that. So that's kinda nice. It's kinda nice. And then the about the author. So this was a really so I'm gonna just talk about the about the author, and then I'm also gonna talk about the foreword, which is at the top of the book, and maybe even like kind of like like look at a couple pieces of that. Because there's a couple things about so one of the things, and also the back of the book has this what I consider to be this like kind of minor identity crisis, which is I was still trying to understand what this thing was that had just kind of traveled through me onto the page through this process. And so in that, I was really conflicted about who am I relative to this? Like, who do what part of myself do I present? Do I present part of myself that has been sort of like the esoteric pathways of like travel and exploration, or do I present the professional, executive person? And I don't know, like, I guess, like, the about the author says, Katie Bickford is an award-winning executive who has built high-performing sales organizations both nationally and internationally for over 30 years. 3 of her companies grew to become publicly listed or made on a major stock exchange and or acquired for over $1 billion. Bickford attributes her success to her passion for identifying and unlocking human potential. In addition to her own longstanding practice, she has obtained extensive training in teaching yoga, meditation, and a wide range of related studies in India, Thailand, Bali, Europe, and the United States. She holds a BS in biology from Keene State and currently lives in Back Bay of Boston. That's fine. I mean, whatever. Fair enough, I guess. And then the back of the book has kind of like is a little bit more it's kind of I guess maybe the sort of the same thing. Yeah, it's kind of the same thing. But yeah, that I guess like the reason for that being sort of weird is that just the whole thing about being like, yeah, who am I talking to here? Who's looking at this? Am I talking to, you know? So so I will say that the last thing like that I wrote was a preface. And I guess the funny part of this to mention is that being somebody who didn't know how to write a book to begin with, and this is it's good to I like the idea of starting with the end here as we do the final wrap on these readings in this format. But as somebody who didn't know how to write a book at all, who didn't know how to write, like I didn't know how to write an essay really. I mean, that the first thing I tried to do was write the preface because it was kind of like, what is it? The forward, preface, like there's all these like when you look at a book, it's like there's a forward, there's a preface, there's all these kind of introductory points, and I never read them. When I read books, I usually go straight to chapter 1. I didn't realize like yeah, full disclosure. I'm like, let's get to the point. Let's get to the work here. Yeah, but the thing was is that in the early days of writing this ooh, I'm gonna talk about the name too. In the early days of writing this, I spent a lot of time trying like, because it's kind of like the idea is like, oh, you start a book from at the beginning and you work your way all the way through. So it's kind of like, okay, I'm gonna write a book the way in this sequence that you'd read it. So I also didn't exactly understand what the difference was between a foreword and a preface and I didn't understand any of that. But I knew there was something about having to present who I was relative to this book. And the truth of the matter is I started writing this sort of opening to the book, like yeah, at the very beginning, what, 2019, 2018, 2019. And part of it's really interesting because as it relates to Parinama and the methodology or the methodology that the book encompasses is that I was trying to explain who I was, and it was too complicated at the time because I was like, "Well, I could explain this part, I could explain that part." It's like, do I explain, like, my upbringing? Do I explain my professional life? Do I explain my yoga practice? Do I explain my success? Do I explain my failures? Do I explain the things I've loved to do? Do I explain the things I've hated to do? And I was like, what is like really forward facing in terms of how I want to like introduce myself or actually like kind of frame the book in terms of like this is your author, kind of just sort of being like welcome, like a it's basically yeah, I mean I hadn't thought about it. It's like saying welcome to this book and let me kind of give you some context before you jump in. But I wrote all of these different prefaces and they were really convoluted because I was still like very like, well, what am I relative to this? And it didn't exist yet. So how could I know what I was relative to it? So that was just a whole thing, which was like writing a preface to a book that hadn't been written yet. I didn't know. I didn't know that it's actually like you don't write the preface first. So that's kind of like a whole thing. But the preface was the thing I wrote. I wrote it in I think it's arguably like, it really is the last thing I wrote. It's the last thing I really wrote, like, as far as creating something and really thinking it through, and I remember this was one of the things Allison and I were working on at, like, the absolute 11th hour, um, to get this done, and so, I mean, I'll kind of, like in just reading I'm gonna read a couple little notes out of it. But that it begins with it's hard to pin down exactly when it all started because in a sense, I've been developing the Parinama method, transform everything a practical and physical guide for most of my life. I can say that it began with my knowing there was a question I had to answer. I just didn't know what the question was. Boy, I've been straddling the business world in an ongoing quest to understand myself through all manner of esoteric practices, and I knew I needed something to help me form my inquiry. That's interesting, to me at least. So, one of the things too, in terms of even the title, is the title of the book had originally been A Practical and Philosophical User's Guide because it was really important to me to be putting forward the notion that this is intended to be self-directed and that this is about a journey inward. And so it's kind of like giving a guide for that journey that you can have that handbook and that like kind of trail guide. But user's guide got taken out. Listen, like I said, I had a great editor, and so part of having a great editor was listening to like good guidance. There wasn't very much that Allison said that I didn't follow. There are a couple things that I'd kind of stand my ground on, and then I'd look then on further inspection, I'd be like, yeah, that's not right. So, let's talk about Parinama. Where did this name come from? Because it's pretty wild that the working title for this whole project was Penny, and it's I won't even get into all of that. It was like, it it just had no it didn't have a ton of meaning. Um, but so the Parinama where Parinama came from is that there was a teacher that this is like, actually, I don't know if this is very encouraging for anyone, but there was a teacher that I had in India who I remember I was watching their, like, social media posts, and it was really clear from what they were writing about that they were really ascending, and I won't get too into this, but they were just breaking through in their, like, into, like, further levels of consciousness, and I remember it was, like, blinding. It was actually, like, reading it was blinding, and it was they wrote this post, and I actually this would probably be better if I could speak directly to the content of it, but they were like, "Look, now I finally know. I finally know what my true nature is." And it was this really it was like, I remember reading the post and just being like, and one of the things I probably wanna mention here is this was not a teacher that I was I really connected with. Like, this is someone I'd been, if you know me, I'm kind of like a raised eyebrow personality, and I'd been like, "Hmm, okay." But it was still my teacher, so I was like, "All right." But anyway, and so that was one of the things about their ongoing posts that were like it was actually like the kind of eyebrow part that I'd had before was like the eyebrow was quickly lowering, or maybe the other one was meeting it, uh, around the idea of like seeing them articulating what they were experiencing and going through. And it was like, wow. And Parinama was a term they had used. Yeah, I'd never heard it before, and it was like, at the time, I was like, "Okay, this is sort of like a silly," just like white people using Sanskrit terms, still has that quality to it when I'm using it, and and so they wrote this incredible post, and then this is like, I don't know, I feel like kinda weird saying this, but I'm just gonna go for it. And then, the next post was their family member saying, "Look, we're still trying to make sense of what happened, but they were admitted into the hospital and they have passed." This was, like, not just a very healthy young person. And so I guess in a way, this is like there was just something, I don't know. I didn't, like, love it. It wasn't, but I didn't love it, but one of the things that really, like, made me made it, like, kind of stick to me, like, and just, like, not go anywhere, was that what parinama meant, it was a Sanskrit word for transformation that was both practical and philosophical. And so when we're pointing to this thing of like, okay, well, what am I? Am I a person that lives in the conventional world, or am I a person that lives in a more sort of esoteric exploration of sort of broader and deeper aspects of what I am? That this notion of like creating transformation that makes it possible to operate and be able to like actually function in the householder world, and also be able to simultaneously be elevating, that was that just, it was like, holy cow. And then one of the things that's interesting is later on there was a parinama. I was told about this because I wasn't part of it, but I was told that there was like a parinama discussion. There was a like group of folks who were reading the book together, and one of the people in the group was Indian, and like an Indian executive who told and this is filtered back to me, that parinama actually means in a modern dialect, cause and effect, which is, so the idea that it's like in the modern like in a modern dialect it means cause and effect, and then in this kind of ancient notion it's like practical and philosophical. That was something I really held on to, and the book is has like this practicality to it. And even in chapter 12, where we're talking about like how do you actually make things in the conventional world that land in the conventional world, but also you read this book and it is like absolutely in like the esoteric zone that is, that actually just works, at least in my experience with it. Now I'm going to just speak about my own experience and not reference other people, is that it just does something. It just works in a way that transcends my understanding of actually like what's happening, but it opens like aspects of myself and creates greater consciousness. And I think the combination of using the physicality and the practice and the bodily intelligence, like the unconscious, subconscious, and consciousness all together, is this really like, I don't know, like yoga, the idea that yoga is a yoke. I think this is a yoke where you're yoking all of those components together to walk in the same direction and support the like greater freedom within your own life. Ironic use of freedom and a yoke, right? But so I wrote a thing. So one of the things was like in this preface, I'm not going to read the entire thing, but of course there's the reference to if there's a book you want to read but it hasn't been written yet, you must write it, the Toni Morrison quote. And then the problem was I didn't know how to write a book, and then I did. It took over 3 years. Yeah. I just really can't overemphasize that enough. If there's anything that you feel like, "Oh my gosh, there's this thing I wanna do, but maybe I'm getting older and it's ridiculous for me to think that I could actually accomplish it." I think this book is a phenomenal example of somebody not knowing how to do something and, like, kind of applying even the methodology in here and it just coming into existence. Yeah. So among myriad other considerations, the process involved many hundreds of hours of research. Okay, blah, blah, blah. So I'm talking about all the stuff that went into I've already talked about in this, about like the gajillions of books I read. I don't think I had mentioned that I'm also like a total dummy that's like in, I should have put some like in a director's cut, there would be kind of a thing that's like, okay, read hundreds, like, okay, interviewed over 100 people, spoke with numerous professionals in fields, both in person. Oh, there isn't anything about the fact that I read like 300 plus, but like some context to be like, this is coming from somebody who usually reads 5 books a year and is like really into like full scale dummy entertainment. So that should be in there. I feel like if there's a second edition, there's got to be some context put in there, because it kind of seems like it's like I'm this really, I'm like painting, sort of positioning myself. I guess you're probably supposed to position yourself as someone who's like really, like an authority, I guess. But so the Parinama method begins with the notion that whatever calls to you is very real, and that what holds you back from it is both the practicality of physical survival and the falsehoods you've been told about who and what you are, passed down by people who are also lied to. Your extraordinary existence is a miracle, just as it is for everyone else you know. And the trick is to come to understand this so you can simultaneously hold compassion, boundary, hope, ambition, conviction, and a radical level of acceptance as you bravely proceed forward. Okay. That's pretty good. Yeah, snaps on that one. So in these pages, you'll find a step-by-step, level-by-level practical process for how to access and activate everything that's already within you. You'll understand how to elevate the unexplored, unknown, yet significant depths of your constitution. Amen. Yes, yes, yes. Woo! With curiosity, wonder, and awe, you'll be able to travel into subterranean earth. Wait, you'll be able to Observe the marvel of you as the intrepid explorer who dares to touch the depths of the ocean, travel into subterranean earth and the periphery of the known cosmos, and revel in the lushest and wildest wildernesses. This is it, and it's where you'll go with the Parinama method. Yeah. So this is, so the synchronized chronology. There's a sequence of biological, neurological, and physiological development that progress in concert. We're raised within environmental conditions and circumstances that shape us when we're most malleable. It's through conscious reclamation that we can both see and travel within ourselves to play an active role in shaping how we experience our life by reconciling layer after layer of reflexes passed down unknowingly from one generation to the next. There's so much love in this. I read this and I just my heart overflows. Whew. Each stage of our development has a corresponding physicality. And by turning to your subconscious and speaking the language of the body mind, which is sensation and movement, you extend a hand back to yourself and become either the hero you've been waiting for or the ideal family member and mentor through profound acts of presence, receiving, and generosity for yourself. We can't talk to the earliest layers within us because they're pre-verbal. They didn't learn through words, but through feeling. However, you can understand these layers and facets by using our mature, advanced cognitive functions that are capable of translating what we learn and know into language of the body. You will communicate with the deepest, sweetest layers of who and what you are, both divine and mundane, practical and philosophical, the evolution of life itself, consciousness trying to know itself through an embodied experience. Yeah, it's pretty tight. This consciousness is hard work because it pushes on the outer limits of our nervous system's capability. The efficiency of reflexes dominates our lives, but consciousness is the leading edge of our biological technology. To be here right now is a chance to sign up for the work of advancing the evolution of humanity that's happening within our acts of awareness. Whew. So I'm really feeling this. This is really... The Parinama method illuminates the repeating patterns and blind spots that keep affecting our lives. I'm actually I'm really touched by this. It was my work with people from different backgrounds, cultures, and experiences all around the world that revealed these similar patterns to me, all working within the same very human themes. The method also incorporates decades of working with and seeing the same struggles I was facing reflected in the experiences of so many others. I didn't know where the repeating patterns came from, yet they kept showing up for me, no matter how many superficial changes I made in my life. So I started a process of going deep into my inner recesses to explore the subterranean aspects of myself that had sometimes led to some perplexing behavior. Yeah, the bottom the bottom line is that we all survive, and depending on the conditions of our circumstances, we can do things that are against what we know is at the core of our integrity. I certainly did. A note on that is my my initial writing on that was significantly more I'm not gonna say explicit, but it was definitely Alice. That's like an Allison special of her helping make that less blood and guts like me, of just being yeah, I'm not present. I don't want, my relating to this has to do with the fact that it's, previous behaviors that, and that's also one of the things of writing the book that was, some of the initial stuff of for anyone, which is who am I? But who am I to do this? Who am I to do this? And it's yeah, that's I am to do this. I've done things that someone who would have experienced that level of my sort of existence or me in my life would be and you wrote a fucking book about about self-actualization, I mean, as a totally in a state of being highly dissociated, angry, and not aware of it, trying to suppress my anger. So it was like seeping out and all these like passive, terrible things, you know. Yeah. So I mean, so that was one of the things too in writing this, to be like, yeah, it's like that's part of, and it gets into it in chapter 5 in the second hub, which is like, and even in all of it is the nuance of just that we're there. The fact that being like a good person is like a real head fuck, because it's like we do it all. Like we do terrible things, we do wonderful things. It's like, it's ultimately, about accountability. And actually, a funny note was when I was writing the book, some of the things that would come up, I'd be like, oh my God, I'd think about something really terrible that I did. And I'd reach out to the person and I would say, listen, I'm really, I'd explain how sorry I was. And they'd say, yeah, about 10 years ago, you did the same thing. You came back to me and I accepted your apology then. So I was like, all right. So it's like, oh, well, I'm double the sorry. Yeah, I mean, that's just like like a dissociation special. There are a few things I now know, and one of them is that although my reflexes and repetitive thoughts will have us let me start. There are a few things I now know, and one of them is that although our reflexes and repetitive thoughts will have us believe otherwise, there's something much grander and marvelous going on, and that your life is a part of it. There's nothing wrong with you, and you don't need fixing. You may just need some focused consciousness and somatic practices to get under the surface. While I was writing this, I imagined you reading it and was lifted and encouraged by the thought. And although it was only in my imagination, it's this moment I'm so grateful for, that you're here now reading these words. It's my hope that you will feel the love and care that's here for you in the Parinama method. Yeah, that is my hope. That is my hope. And as a note, I will say that this love letter was also unknowingly written to myself, and I've thought about this recently, that my ability to adore and love myself was absent enough that it would have been impossible to undertake something like this with like the intent of like self-discovery and developing this love emanating from within me. It just would be too foreign. And so a lot of writing this was like writing it kind of like in the dissociated aspect of like writing it for somebody else. And then this past year, and this is the final section of reading this and doing the practice myself, is to experience like having written that love letter and wanting it for you and wanting it for me, and having that yeah this thing that I was like wanting for other people, that I wound up receiving it myself, where when I was writing it, it wasn't fully mine. So I think I love the opening like quote is sometimes of the book, which is, sometimes we have the absolute certainty there's something inside us that's so hideous and monstrous that we ever search it out, we won't be able to stand looking at it. But it's when we come face to face with that demon that we face the angel. And that's Hubert Shelby. So that is the final reading of the final freestyle reading of the Parinama method. Now, cover to cover, there's like 300 plus million of these readings that exist now on as like in the YouTube. So the next I want to speak to like the next era, which is going to be the structured sessions that are designed to support a practice with this, that we do this together, but that it's 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 gated in a 30-minute period, likely going to be from 8 to 8:30 Monday, probably Monday, Wednesday, Thursday. It's going to be like 3 or 4 days, weekdays, where there'll be a really consolidated reading, some reflections on it, and an exercise, like the idea on a particular topic. So it will still be tied to reading the book cover to cover, but instead of it just being like me cracking it open and just like blasting off with whatever's coming to mind, it's going to be prepared and a tight 30, where it's intended for you to be able to really dedicate a specific amount of time to this process in a way that is structured and offers up both the practical and the philosophical aspect of this, which is, the idea that someone who is like living a life can actually get some of the tools in every session, or a tool, and then some room for the contemplation and the discussion. And hopefully these will be more accessible to folks. That's my intention, is that this will be a more accessible way for people to do a kind of cover to cover read on Parinama, and then we do it together and we just kind of keep riding the wave. So let's see. Yeah. So I'm going to be posting on all socials on this, and if, just with more details, and it is my intention to start on next Monday. So hopefully that, I can't see why that won't happen. All right. Thank you so much. And I just want to send you so much love and appreciation for watching. And yeah, I mean, it's really wonderful. I was really sad about this ending, because it's been really meaningful for me to show up for this and to keep doing it. It's been very, like, it's really been in flow. It really has been something that's like it's been very natural. When I'm away from being in the book, I feel like I can feel it. I can feel what it feels like to be doing this practice actively and spending the time in the notions of it, and as a result cultivating it. And yeah. So really, I really appreciate that, to have had this opportunity to do it here and to read it out loud. I think that I'd really encourage anyone who is doing this to do the exact same thing. And even if you just want to like create your own YouTube channel that's like private or whatever, and do a video journal where you're talking through your process, I really recommend it. This is really a wonderful thing for me. And, special shout out to those who have really engaged in at various stages. One of the things I think is really important is to keep in mind that this process ebbs and flows. You come in and out of it. There are times where you just come in and out of it. It's not like a linear thing. So it's just kind of, instead of like shame, like having shame when it's like when you're coming out of it and being like, I'm only supposed to be expanding or growing or progressing. It's like, just to really accept ebbs and flows, to understand it's like a really natural thing where you kind of come in and out of things. And I think that, the most that you can really want for in this practice is the devotional aspect of continuing to show up for yourself. And if it means that you're not practicing because you're actually showing up for yourself because you need rest, like you're bringing a real conscious element to not practicing, that's loving and without shame and without fear, and trust in yourself, that it's like, like learning to trust ourselves in this processes. But yeah, we're in this together. We're all paddling in this, in our in our canoe here. And so as like a thank you for for participation in watching this, it's like doing this in this format has really enriched my own practice and my own process. So it's been truly an honor and like and a privilege and really, I don't know if I have the right words for it, but I'm just incredibly grateful. And I guess there's some shout outs. I mean, certainly Mira, certainly Kristen first come to mind. But once again, we're back in the acknowledgements problem where it's like I haven't like yeah, you know what, the shout outs, can we just say like sort of say the shout outs at a later date? Comprehensive shout outs. There's many of you. And also the thing is, I'm as most people know, I'm very precious about protecting people's privacy, which we've talked about before. But this practice is so personal that, and it's like, actually one last thing I'll say is that I'd posted something on social media and I received like private messages and text messages from people, and one person had sent me a message saying, almost apologizing for not putting a comment on the original post. And my thing with that is like, there really is something to be said for your most like vulnerable processes to be allowed to happen in a particular way where it's like it's yours, and until that you're ready to put them out for scrutiny, that when they're vulnerable, that you keep them in the boundary of your intimate space, because it's not for everyone's like kind of like watching an audience. It's not like asking for audience participation or whatever. It's really, there really is a place to be said. There's a place for things to be really your own, especially in this process. And I find that so important, that it's like people sharing things with me has been such an honor. I mean, the things that I've received are extraordinary, and I guess my gratitude for all of them has to do is reflected in the fact that I don't disclose anything, because I feel like that's almost like to share things or talk about them, it's kind of makes it less safe for people to feel like they can be really open with me. And that to me is like the most important thing, even though it does bum me out sometimes, because I do think like, oh, it'd be really effective to be able to share these things with people, to share examples of what other people are going through, or share examples of things people have come forward with and said, this is an issue I'm having. Or like people sent me videos of their kids and being like, look, this is a second hump thing. And even, I mean, like, yeah, so yeah, I can't, it's like, and just really being like, oh, this would be so amazing for people to see and connect with. But I guess if I were to like try to come up with like an excellent rationalization on this, it would be about how this process is about going inward, in the sense of like filling your cup up so that there's overflow. Like that it's like this sense of, it's like going inward. And so like the reflex of looking outward for validations, that's a rationalization. It's totally a rationalization. But like that point being that what this practice is about like getting your own cup to be just lush by shedding adaptations and patterning that drains our energy, like holds us in patterns that like really take a lot of work to maintain, and like extract joy from our lives and make things that should be enjoyable like uncomfortable or shameful. I was just having a conversation, it's funny, I was just in Lush, the store that has the nice smelling stuff, and I had a conversation. It's funny, I had a conversation with the person that was helping me, and I was talking about shame because they were telling me that they're a writer, and I could tell they were sort of, like, really working through this thing. It's like, "Well, I'm not writing right now, and I had COVID, and I had this, and I had that," and so I just had a little discussion about the fact that it's like, it's winter right now. It's not New Year. New Year's is spring, like the rebirth of like new things and starting anew. And the idea that we're shifted off of like out of like understanding that this is a period of like lower light, it's colder, it's more insular, and that when we're working against that with any kind of shaming, where it's like, I should be working, I should be productive, I should be this, it's like this point where it should be filling us with like kind of like more like energy and should be giving us like life affirmingness that to come into spring with. Like we enter spring exhausted because it's been like I was doing winter all wrong. I should be out, sort of like whatever. And it's like just that whole thing about like having this relationship with ourselves where it's like instead of this internalized figure that's always telling us that we're doing it wrong, and and it's kind of the thing of like if I wasn't yelling at you about doing this, you wouldn't do it, right? And it's like that, that's part of how it continues to exist, is believing that like these functions of like being fearful, it's like if I didn't keep you vigilant, you wouldn't stay safe. If I didn't, kind of keep you on your toes about not being a slacker and all this kind of shit, then you never get anything done. And it's, and then the shame sort of takes credit for when we do things, because it's like, see, look what I did. And it's like, no, a lot of that's just naturally arising productivity, like the inspiration, the creativity that it arises. And that shame is draining, makes us feel bad, and it's like, "Ooh, ooh, ooh." I mean, yeah, there's a place and a time for, like, giving yourself a little kick and, like, activating your, like, 3rd hub and, like, getting if you're kinda like, "Wow, this doesn't feel great to be sitting around this much." It's like that's coming from a relationship with yourself where it's like, it's actually more important that it doesn't feel great to sit around that much, not that it's like I'm doing anything wrong. It's like, it doesn't feel great. I'd actually like to be doing something. It would feel good in my body, it would feel good in my mind, it would feel good, and that kind of relationship that we develop with ourselves. And that way, we're not getting drained by sort of notions of external scorn or, being fearful and all this kind of stuff that we discuss throughout the book. But anyway, we had the discussion at Lush. I had the discussion with Lush, and at the end of the discussion, they gave me free perfume. And they said, we have this thing that we can do, is that when somebody really affects us, we can give them a gift. And so I'm using that as an example because that actually happens to me frequently. And I'm saying this because as an example of the cup, like your cup overflowing, that this is a practice, and that the purpose of this is to actually like it's like investing in ourselves and in like what we are, so that we have so much more, and that it's like it, to have like yeah, to have the confidence and the care and the emotional capacity and the lack of being nervous about being weird or whatever, that, and to be able to connect with people. 'Cause I mean, I will say it happens to me a lot, like people and it's not a flex about, like, me being this person that's, like, extraordinarily extraordinary in this way that's exemplary. It's something that you have in yourself too. You know what this is like. You've done it. It's happened to you. Where somebody's gone, "I just really wanna do this thing for you because 'cause you're shining brightly." Think about that. Think about, and that's, I guess, is a good closing exercise, is to think about a time somebody just was like, "I wanna give you this candle. You just have this, like," or "Thank you," or a friend said, "It really helped me that you did this," or somebody writes you a note and says, You saying this really mattered to me," or you post something on social media and somebody sends you a message and says, "That came at just the right time. I really needed to hear that." Um, just like that's who you are, that's you and your integrity, is when your cup is overflowing. Yeah. All right. So that's it for this version. Oh, I'm having a hard time letting it go, but I guess I have to let it go because the next version is really truly like mirrors what's been talked about in this section, has to do with production as it relates to like creating a book that ultimately goes out into the world and is in service of like the reader and the user. That the next version of this is actually going to be a lot more in service. There's going to be the service element that comes from like consistently showing up on a schedule and coming with a structured format, so that it's like it's kind of like making a really like honoring, loving, and respecting offering of the exchange of your time for something that is ultimately like back to the thing of like an investment. And I guess investment's like such a terrible word. It's like really bad. It's for this. It's too transactional, but I guess it is what it is. It's like that for that it's an offering with a boundary on it and with a intention and a commitment and a hope. And yeah, maybe could probably come up with words for a while. Get out the thesaurus. So, all right. So, yeah, I'm still working out some of the details and I'm going to be posting these details on social, but I think that I'll be doing these as lives and they'll likely be going off at 8 from 8 to 8:30, and I'm just deciding which days of the week to do them on and some more things about the format. And also they'll be on live, so if you want to rewatch them, at later times, they'll still be there. So yeah, 8 o'clock on Monday. Be there, be square. All right. I love you so much, and I'm so grateful for you. And let's do this. All right. Bye for now.